When my son-in-law David told me I was no longer welcome in their home, I simply nodded and walked away. But inside, a lifetime of unspoken hurt and quiet sacrifices came roaring to the surface. For years, I had been the one to keep the peace, to put my family's needs before my own, to bite my tongue and write the checks. Now, as I faced the cold reality of David's dismissal, something deep within me began to stir, a long-forgotten sense of self-respect, a flicker of defiance. The days of being an easy target, the dependable old man who could be pushed aside without consequence, were over. It was time to take a stand, to reclaim my voice, and to show my daughter the true meaning of strength and love. The reckoning had begun. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. The afternoon sun slanted through the blinds of my study, casting long, tired on the wall. I sat motionless in my old leather chair, hands clasped around a lukewarm cup of coffee, trying to process the events of the past few hours. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner, once a soothing rhythm, now felt like a mocking. My daughter Emily's voice, trembling with tears, echoed in my mind. "Dad, I don't know how to say this, but David and we think it's best if you don't come around for a while. He feels like you're not respecting his position in the family, and it's causing tension between us. I'm so sorry, but we need some space right now." Space. The word tasted bile on my tongue. After 35 years of pouring my heart and soul into my family, of being the rock they could always depend on, this is what it had come to. My own daughter, the little girl who once begged me to check her closet for monsters, was casting me aside at the whim of a man who'd never known a day of hardship in his charmed life. I thought back to the day Emily first introduced me to David, her eyes shining with the kind of love that made you forget the world's sharp edges. He'd shaken my hand with a firm grip and a winning smile, praising Emily's beauty and intelligence like he'd won the cosmic jackpot. I'd swallowed my reservations about his polished veneer and the way he talked about my daughter like an accessory to his success, telling myself that all that mattered was Emily's happiness. Over the years, I'd bitten my tongue and reached for my checkbook more times than I could count. When David lost his high-paying job and they needed help with the mortgage, I'd taken out a second loan on my own home without a second thought. When their car broke down and they couldn't afford the repairs, I'd handed over my credit card and told them to get whatever they needed. And when Emily mentioned how much she admired the kitchen renovations in David's boss's new McMansion, I'd spent my weekends tearing out old cabinets and installing sleek granite countertops until my hands ached and my back screamed in protest. But it was never enough. No matter how much I gave, how many times I put their needs before my own, David always found a reason to criticize, to undermine, to make me feel like an outsider in my own family. And now, after all the sacrifices, all the quiet indignities I'd endured for the sake of keeping the peace, he'd finally convinced Emily to cut me out completely. A sudden wave of anger surged through me, hot and bright. I gripped the coffee mug until my knuckles turned white, fighting the urge to hurl it against the wall. No, I wouldn't give David the satisfaction of knowing he'd gotten under my skin. I wouldn't let Emily see how deeply her words had cut. I was a man who'd survived Vietnam, who'd built a business from nothing and raised a family through the worst of times. I wasn't about to let some slick-talking suit with a superiority complex reduce me to a broken old man. I rose from my chair and walked to the window, looking out at the backyard where Emily and her brother used to play, their laughter echoing off the tall oak trees. They're the tall oak ghosts now, remnants of a life I'd poured my whole self into without reservation. But as I watched the leaves rustle in the breeze, a flicker of something long buried stirred in my chest, a sense of purpose, of clarity, of the man I used to be before I'd let myself become a doormat in my own home. I turned away from the window and strode to my desk, pulling out a crisp sheet of paper from the top drawer, without a tremor. I uncapped my favorite pen and began to write. Dear Emily, the words flowed from some place deep and still. I've given you everything I have, my love, my support, my unwavering presence. But I see now that in trying to be the father you needed, I've failed to be the man I needed to be for myself. The clock ticked on, seconds bleeding into minutes, as I filled page after page with the truths I'd left unspoken for too long. With each word, each line, I felt a growing sense of strength, of purpose. David might have convinced Emily to push me aside, but he couldn't take away the one thing that had always defined me, my integrity, my unshakable sense of what was right. As the last rays of daylight faded from the room, I signed my name at the bottom of the final page and sat back, a strange calm settling over me. I didn't know what the next chapter would bring, but I knew one thing for certain. The days of being a silent, obliging spectator in my own life were over. It was time to reclaim my voice, my worth, and my place in this family. I folded the letter carefully and slipped it into an ivory envelope, the expensive kind Emily had always insisted on using for her dinner party invitations. The ones I dutifully picked up from the printer on my way home from work, never questioning the cost or the extravagance. With a steady hand, I addressed the envelope to my daughter and reached for my car keys. It was time to pay a visit to the house I'd helped build, to the family I'd devoted my life to, and to the man who thought he could erase me with a few well-chosen words. As I stepped out into the cool evening air, the first stars flickering to life in the inky sky, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in years. Anticipation, determination, the thrill of finally standing up for myself after a lifetime of quiet concession. I slid behind the wheel of my old truck and turned the key in the ignition, the engine rumbling to life like a faithful friend. It was time to teach David a lesson about what it meant to be a real man, a real father, and a force to be reckoned with. The old dog still had some fight left in him, and it was high time I reminded them all of who I really was. The tires crunched on the gravel as I pulled out of the driveway. The letter to Emily nestled in my breast pocket like a talisman. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain. I was done being a footnote in my own story. The next chapter started now, and I was going to make damn sure it was one they'd never forget. The drive to Emily's house was a blur, the familiar streets and landmarks passing by in a haze of adrenaline and determination. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, the letter to my daughter burning a hole in my pocket, like a secret I'd carried for too long. As I turned onto their tree-lined street, I felt a pang of nostalgia, mixed with bitterness. How many times had I driven this same route, my heart full of love and anticipation, only to be met with David's cold smiles and thinly veiled condescension? How many times had I swallowed my pride and pushed down the nagging feeling that I was being slowly, methodically pushed out of my own family. I parked in front of their sprawling craftsman home, the one I'd helped them find and finance, and took a deep breath. The porch lights glowed warmly, casting long shadow across the manicured lawn. I could hear the faint sounds of laughter and clinking glasses filtering through the open windows, a picture-perfect scene of domestic bliss. But beneath the surface, I knew the cracks were beginning to show. I stepped out of my truck and made my way up the front path, the letter clutched tightly in my hand. As I reached the door, I paused, suddenly unsure. Was I ready for this? Was I prepared to confront the man who'd turned my own daughter against me and risk losing everything I'd spent my life building? The answer came in a rush of clarity, a sudden certainty that settled deep in my bones. Yes, I was ready. I had to be. For Emily, for my grandkids, for the man I used to be, before I'd let myself become a shadow in my own life. I raised my hand and cocked on the door, 3 sharp raps that echoed through the quiet night. For a long moment there was silence, and then I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps, approach of footsteps approaching, the click of expensive Italian leather on hardwood. The door swung open, and there he was, David, my son-in-law, the man who'd charmed his way into our lives, and slowly, systematically, begun to dismantle everything I held dear. He stood before me in a crisp white shirt and tailored slacks, a glass of amber liquid dangling carelessly from his manicured fingers. "Jonathan," he said, his voice smooth and controlled, "I thought we'd agreed that it was best for everyone if you took some time away from the family." I felt a hot flush of anger rise in my cheeks, but I pushed it down, determined to keep my composure. "David," I said evenly, "we need to talk." He raised an eyebrow, a flicker of annoyance passing over his chiseled features. "I think we've said all there is to say, don't you? Emily and I have made our decision, and I'd appreciate it if you respect that." I took a step forward, drawing myself up to my full height. I might have been a good decade older than him, but I still had a few inches on him, and I saw a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes as I met his gaze head-on. "No, David," I said quietly, my voice steady and sure. "I don't think we have. You see, I've spent the last 35 years putting this family first, putting Emily first. I've given everything I have, my time, my money, my love, without hesitation or complaint. And now, after all that, you have the audacity to tell me that I'm not welcome in my own daughter's home, that I'm not good enough to be a part of my own grandkids' lives?" David's jaw clenched, his eyes hardening. "Jonathan, I understand that you're upset, but let's be realistic here. You're not getting any younger, and Emily and I have our own lives to live, our own family to think about. We can't keep dropping everything to cater to your needs and whims." I barked out a short, humorless laugh. "My needs and whims? Is that what you call it when I spent every weekend for 3 months renovating your kitchen, because Emily mentioned how much she loved the one in your boss's house? Or when I took out a second mortgage on my own home to help you keep this roof over your head when you lost your job? Tell me, David, when exactly did my love and support become a burden to you?" For the first time, I saw a flicker of uncertainty in David's eyes, a chink in his carefully crafted armor. He opened his mouth to respond, but I held up a hand, cutting him off. "No, David. I'm done listening to your excuses and manipulations. I'm done being treated like a senile old man who doesn't know his own mind. I'm done watching you poison my relationship with my daughter and grandkids for your own selfish ends. I pulled the letter from my pocket and held it out to him, my hand trembling slightly. I wrote this for Emily, I said, my voice thick with emotion. But I want you to read it first. I want you to understand exactly what you've done and what you stand to lose. David, he stated, his eyes flicking from the letter to my face and back again. For a moment I thought he might actually refuses. But then he reached out and took the letter, his fingers brushing against mine briefly. He unfolded the pages slowly, his eyes scanning the words I'd poured my heart into. I watched his face carefully, looking for any sign of remorse, of understanding, of the man I'd once hoped he could be. But as he read on, his expression only hardened, his mouth twisting into a sneer. When he finished, he looked up at me, his eyes cold and flat. "Is this supposed to make me feel sorry for you?" he asked, his voice dripping with contempt. "Am I supposed to fall on my knees and beg for your forgiveness because you finally realized what a pathetic, useless old man you've become?" I felt like I'd been slapped, his words cutting through me like a knife. But even as the pain washed over me, I felt a flicker of something else, something I hadn't felt in longer than I could remember. Anger, pure and righteous, burning through me like a cleansing fire. "No," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "I don't want your pity or your forgiveness. I want you to look me in the eye and tell me the truth. I want you to admit that you've been manipulating Emily, turning her against me, all because you can't stand the thought of sharing her with anyone else. I want you to own up to the fact that you're a small, petty man who's so threatened by the idea of a loving, supportive father that you'd rather destroy a family than risk losing control." David's face twisted into an ugly mask of fury, his fists clenching at his sides. "How dare you speak to me like that in my own home?" he hissed, taking a step toward me. "You think just because you wrote some pathetic little letter, you can come in here and start making demands? You're nothing, Jonathan. You're a sad, lonely old man who's outlived his usefulness. And if you can't accept that, then you have no place in this family." I stood my ground, even as he loomed over me, his breath hot and sour on my face. "That's where you're wrong, David," I said evenly. "I have every place in this family. I'm Emily's father, and I will always be a part of her life, no matter how hard you try to push me out. And if you can't accept that, if you can't find a way to treat me with the respect and gratitude I deserve, then maybe it's time for Emily to start questioning what kind of man she married." For a long, tense moment we stood there, locked in a silent battle of wills. I could see the veins throbbing in David's temple, the muscle ticking in his jaw. And for a second I thought he might actually take a swing at me. But then, just as quickly as it had come, the moment passed. David took a step back, his face smoothing back into its usual mask of calm superiority. "I think you should go, Jonathan," he said coldly, "before you say something you'll regret." I nodded slowly, a small, sad smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. "I think I already have," I said softly. "But that's the funny thing about regret. Sometimes it's the only thing that can set you free." I turned and walked away, my footsteps heavy on the front path. As I reached my truck, I heard the door slick shut behind me, a sound like a gunshot in the still night air. I climbed behind the wheel and sat there for a long moment, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. I knew I'd just crossed a line, that there was no going back to the way things were before. But even as the fear and uncertainty washed over me, I felt a flicker of something else, something I'd almost forgotten the feeling of: hope, small and fragile, but growing stronger with every passing second. I took a deep breath and started the engine, pulling away from the curb with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain. I was done being a spectator in my own life. I was ready to fight for my place in this family, and for the love and respect I knew I deserved. As I drove off into the night, the letter to Emily burning a hole in my pocket, I felt a sense of peace settle over me, a quiet certainty that no matter what happened next, I'd finally found the courage to stand up for myself. And that, in the end, was all that mattered. The days following my confrontation with David were a blur of emotions and uncertainty. I half expected Emily to call me, to demand an explanation for my behavior, or to tell me that I was no longer welcome in their lives. But as the hours turned into days, the silence grew deafening. I tried to keep myself busy, to focus on the things I'd neglected for so long in my efforts to be the perfect father and grandfather. I tinkered with the old car in my garage, the one I'd been meaning to restore for years. I tended to my garden, pulling weeds and pruning the rose bushes that had once been Maria's pride and joy. But no matter how hard I tried to lose myself in the familiar routines of my life, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had fundamentally changed, that the ground beneath my feet had shifted in some irrevocable way. It was on the fourth day that the letter arrived. I found it in my mailbox, nestled between the bills and the junk mail, my name and address written in Emily's familiar handwriting. For a long moment, I just stared at it, my heart hammering in my chest. Part of me wanted to tear it open right there, to devour its contents like a starving man. But another part of me, the part that had learned the hard way that hope could be a dangerous thing, hesitated. I carried the letter inside and sat down at my kitchen table, the same table where Emily had done her homework as a child, where Maria and I had shared countless meals and conversations over the years. With trembling fingers, I slid my thumb under the seal and pulled out the single sheet of paper inside. "Dear Dad," it began, and I felt my throat tighten at the sight of those two simple words. I don't know where to start or how to explain the things that have happened between us. I know that I've hurt you deeply, that I've allowed David to come between us in ways that I never intended. I know that I've been selfish and ungrateful, that I've taken for granted all the sacrifices you've made for me over the years. I felt hot tears pricking at the corners of my eyes, and I blinked them away furiously, determined to finish what she had to say. When David told me about your confrontation, about the letter you wrote, I was angry at first. I couldn't believe that you would go behind my back like that you would try to undermine my marriage and my choices. But as I sat with your words, as I really thought about what you were trying to tell me, I realized that you were right. I realized that I've been so caught up in my own life, in trying to be the perfect wife and mother, that I've lost sight of what really matters. I felt a flicker of hope sparked to life in my chest, small and fragile, but growing stronger with every word. I know that I can't undo the hurt I've caused you, Dad. I know that I can't take back the times I've dismissed your feelings or ignored your needs. but I want you to know that I'm sorry, truly and deeply sorry, and that I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make things right between us." The tears were flowing for real freely now, blurring the words on the page, but I couldn't stop reading, couldn't stop drinking in the love and the regret and the tentative hope that poured out of every line. "I don't know what the future holds for us, Dad. I don't know if David and I can find a way to move forward together, or if the damage between us is too deep to repair. But what I do know is that you are my father, and that nothing and no one can ever change that. What I do know is that I love you, and that I want you to be a part of my life and my children's lives for as long as we have left." I set the letter down gently, my hands shaking, and my heart so full it felt like it might burst. For a long moment, I just sat there, trying to absorb the magnitude of what had just happened. Emily, my little girl, my pride and joy, had reached out to me, had acknowledged the pain she'd caused and the love that still bound us together. It wasn't a solution, I knew that. It wasn't a magic wand that could erase the years of hurt and neglect and misunderstanding. But it was a start, a tiny seed of hope that, with time and care and attention, might just grow into something strong and beautiful and true. I rose from the table, suddenly restless, suddenly filled with a sense of purpose that I hadn't felt in longer than I could remember. I needed to do something, to take some small step towards healing the rift between us, towards building the kind of relationship we both needed and Desiserve served. I picked up the phone and dialed Emily's number, my fingers trembling slightly as I punched in the familiar digits. It rang once, twice, 3 times, and then I heard her voice, tentative and unsure, but achingly familiar. "Dad?" she said softly, and I felt my heart swell with love and gratitude and a fierce, protective pride. "Emily?" I said, my own voice thick with emotion. "I got your letter, and I just wanted to say, I love you too. And I'm here whenever you're ready to talk, whenever you're ready to start over. I'm here and I'm not going anywhere." There was a long pause, and then I heard her take a deep, shuddering breath. "Thank you, Dad," she whispered. And in those 3 simple words, I heard a lifetime of love and regret and tentative, fragile hope. We talked for a long time after that about everything and nothing, about the memories we shared and the future we both wanted to build. And as the sun began to set outside my window, casting long shadow across the kitchen floor, I felt a sense of peace settle over me, a quiet certainty that no matter what happened next, I had finally found my way back to the thing that mattered most: my family, my love, and the unbreakable bond that tied us together. It wasn't going to be easy, I knew that. There would be more hurts to healed and more bridges to be mended. But for the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be, not as a spectator in my own life, but as an active participant, a man with a voice and a purpose and a heart that was finally ready to live again. In the weeks that followed my conversation with Emily, I threw myself into the task of rediscovering who I was outside of my role as a father and grandfather. It wasn't easy at first. For so long, my identity had been wrapped up in the needs and expectations of others, in the constant pressure to be the strong, steadfast patriarch who never wavered or showed weakness. But as I began to explore the interests and passions I'd let fall by the wayside over the years, I felt a new sense of energy and purpose begin to take hold. I joined a woodworking class at the local community center, eager to learn new skills and connect with people who shared my love of crafting beautiful, functional objects from raw materials. I volunteered at the local food bank, Pax King groceries, and chatting with the clients who came in each week, their stories of struggle and resilience, reminding me of how much I still had to be graceful for. And perhaps most importantly, I began to open up to the people around me in ways I never had before. I reached out to old friends I'd lost touch with over the years, inviting them over for coffee or a game of cards. I struck up conversations with strangers at the park or the library, learning about their lives and their dreams and their challenges. Slowly but surely, I began to build a network of support and companionship that had nothing to do with my role as a father or grandfather. I began to see myself not just as Emily's dad or Jack and Sophie's grandpa, but as Roy, a man with his own thoughts and feelings and dreams. Of course, my relationship with Emily was still a work in progress. We talked on the phone regularly, sometimes for hours at a time, sharing stories and memories and tentative hopes for the future. She told me about the struggles she was having with David, about the doubts and fears that kept her up at night. And in turn, I shared my own experiences and insights, offering her the kind of unconditional love and support that I'd always longed to give her. But even as Emily and I worked to repair the damage that had been done to our relationship, I knew that I couldn't rely on her to be my sole source of fulfillment and purpose. I knew that I needed to find a way to stand on my own 2 feet, to build a life that was rich and meaningful and entirely my own. And so I threw myself into the task of self-discovery with a passion I hadn't felt in years. I took long walks in the woods behind my house, marveling at the beauty of the changing leaves and the crisp, clean air. I read books that challenged my thinking and expanded my horizons, from dense philosophical tomes to heart-rending memoirs of love and loss and redemption. I even started writing again, something I hadn't done since Maria died. At first, it was just a few scattered thoughts and observations jotted down in a notebook. But as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, I found myself pouring my heart out onto the page, exploring the deepest corners of my soul with a raw, unflinching honesty that surprised even me. Through it all, I could feel myself changing, growing, becoming more fully myself than I had ever been before. And as the winter gave way to spring, and the world around me began to come alive again, I felt a sense of hope and possibility that I hadn't experienced in longer than I could remember. But even as I reveled in my new sense of self, I knew that the hardest part of my journey was still ahead of me. I knew that sooner or later I would have to confront David again, to have the difficult conversations, and make the hard choices that would determine the future of our family. I didn't know what that confrontation would look like or how it would all play out in the end. But I did know one thing for certain. I was ready for it. I was ready to stand up for myself and for Emily and for the love that bound us together, no matter what obstacles or challenges lay ahead. And so, as the days grew longer and the flowers began to be alim, I steeled myself for the battle to come. I knew that it wouldn't be easy, that there would be moments of doubt and fear and pain along the way. But I also knew that I had the strength and the courage and the love to see it through to the end. Because in the end, that was what mattered most. Not the money or the status or the trappings of success, but the bonds of family and friendship and love that tied us all together. And as long as I had those bonds to guide me and sustain me, I knew that I could face whatever lay ahead, with my head held high and my heart full of hope. As spring turned to summer, I began to notice a subtle shift in my relationship with Emily. Our conversations, which had once been tentative and fraught with unspoken hurts, began to take on a new depth and honesty. She started opening up to me about her struggles with David, about the doubts and fears that plagued her as she tried to navigate the complexities of marriage and motherhood. At first, I simply listened, offering her the kind of unconditional support and acceptance that I had always longed to give her. But as the weeks passed and the stories of David's manipulation and control began to pile up, I felt a growing sense of unease and frustration. It wasn't that I wanted to interfere in my daughter's marriage or tell her what to do. I knew that she needed to find her own path, to make her own choices, and learn from her own mistakes. But at the same time, I couldn't shake the feeling that David was slowly but surely poisoning the well of their relationship, eroding Emily's sense of self and autonomy in ways that would be difficult, if not impossible, to recover from. And so, one warm July evening, as Emily and I sat on my back porch, sipping iced tea and watching the firefly dance in the gathering dusk, I finally broached the subject that had been weighing on my mind for weeks. "Emily," I said softly, my voice barely louder than the chirping of the crickets in the grass, "I know that you love David, and I know that you want to make your marriage work. But I'm worried about you. I'm worried about the way he talks to you, the way he tries to control every aspect of your life. I'm worried that he's not the man you thought he was, and that he's not the kind of partner you deserve. For a long moment, Emily was silent, her gaze fixed on some distant point beyond the trees. Then slowly, she turned to me, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "I know, Dad," she said softly, her voice trembling with emotion. "I've been having the same thoughts myself. It's so hard to admit that I might have made a mistake, that I might have chosen the wrong person to spend my life with." I reached out and took her hand in mine, squeezing it gently. "I understand, sweetheart. Believe me, I know how hard it is to face the truth about the people we love. But sometimes the bravest thing we can do is to be honest with ourselves, even when it hurts." Emily nodded, a single tear slipping down her cheek. "I just don't know what to do, Dad. I don't want to give up on my marriage, but I also don't want to lose myself in the process. I don't want to wake up one day and realize that I've become someone I don't recognize, someone I don't even like." I felt my heart break for her then, for the pain and confusion and fear that I could see etched into every line of her face. But at the same time, I felt a flicker of hope, a sense that maybe, just maybe, we were finally getting somewhere. "Emily," I said gently, "I can't tell you what to do. I can't make this decision for you. But what I can tell you is that you are strong, and you are capable, and you deserve to be happy. And if David can't or won't give you the love and respect and support that you need, then maybe it's time to start thinking about what your life might look like without him." Emily was quiet for a long moment, her gaze turned inward as she mulled over my words. Then slowly, she nodded, a small, tentative smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "You're right, Dad," she said softly, her voice filled with a new sense of determination. "I need to start putting myself first to start thinking about what I want and need instead of always trying to please everyone else. And if that means making some tough choices, then that's what I'll do. I felt a rush of pride and love for my daughter then, for the strength and resilience and wisdom that I could see shining through her tears, and I knew, with a sudden, fierce certainty, that no matter what happened next, no matter how hard the road ahead might be, we would face it together, as a family. Over the next few weeks, I watched as Emily began to take small but significant steps towards reclaiming her sense of self. She started setting boundaries with David, asserting her needs and wants instead of always defeating to his. She began spending more time with friends and family, nurturing the relationships that had fallen by the wayside in the years since her marriage. And perhaps most importantly, she started talking to me more openly and honestly about her feelings, about the doubts and fears and hopes that swirled inside her, like leaves caught in a storm. It wasn't always easy, and there were times when I could see the toll that the constant conflict and uncertainty was taking on her. But through it all, I remained steadfast in my support, offering her the kind of unconditional love and acceptance that I had always longed to give her. And slowly but surely I began to see a change in Emily, a growing sense of strength and self-awareness that filled me with hope and pride. She was becoming the woman I had always known she could be, confident, capable, unafraid to stand up for herself and for what she believed in. I knew that there were still challenges ahead, that the road to true happiness and fulfillment was never smooth or easy. But I also knew that Emily had the tools and the support she needed to navigate whatever lay ahead, to build a life that was entirely her own. And as the summer drew to a close and the leaves began to turn, I felt a sense of peace and contentment that I hadn't experienced in longer than I could remember, because I knew that no matter what the future held, I had played a part in helping my daughter find her way back to herself, back to the person she was always meant to be. As the leaves began to turn and the air grew crisp with the promise of autumn, I knew that the time had come for the final confrontation with David. Emily had made great strides in reclaiming her sense of self and asserting her independence. But I knew that she would never truly be free until she confronted the man who had tried to control and manipulate her for so long. And so, on a cool October evening, I found myself once again standing on the front porch of the house that David and Emily had once shared, my heart hammering in my chest as I raised my hand to kick. But before I could make contact with the heavy oak door, it swung open, revealing David's tall, lean frame, silhouetted against the warm light of the entryway. He looked different than the last time I had seen him. His face was thinner, his eyes shadowed with dark circles that spoke of sleepless nights and unspoken worries. For a long moment, we simply stared at each other, the weight of all that had passed between us hanging heavy in the air. Then slowly, David stepped aside, gesturing for me to enter. "I've been expecting you," he said quietly, his voice rough with emotion. "Emily said you'd be coming by." I nodded, stepping past him into the familiar space of the living room. The furniture was the same, but the room felt different somehow, as though the very air had shifted in the wake of Emily's absence. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady, and even despite the nerves churning in my stomach. "About Emily and about the future of this family?" David nodded, sinking down onto the couch with a heavy sigh. "I know," he said softly, his gaze fixed on his clasped hands. "I've been doing a lot of thinking lately about the way I've behaved and the choices I've made. And I've come to realize that I've been wrong about a lot of things." I felt a flicker of surprise at his words, at the raw honesty and vulnerability I could hear in his voice. But I knew that I couldn't let my guard down. Not yet. "Go on," I said, settling into the armchair across from him. David took a deep breath, his eyes finally meeting mine. "I've been selfish," he said quietly, his voice trembling slightly. "I've been so focused on my own needs and wants that I've lost sight of what really matters. I've pushed Emily away. I've tried to control her and manipulate her. And in the process, I've damaged the very thing I claim to love." I nodded, feeling a strange mixture of empathy and satisfaction at his words. "And what do you intend to do about that?" I asked, my voice steady and even. David was silent for a long moment, his gaze turning inward. "I want to make things right," he said finally, his voice filled with a new sense of determination. "I want to be the kind of husband that Emily deserves, the kind of father that our children can look up to. I know that it won't be easy, and I know that I have a long way to go. But I'm willing to do whatever it takes to earn back her trust and her love." I felt a rush of emotion at his words, at the sincerity and the humility that I could hear in his voice. And in that moment, I knew that the battle had been won, that the long, hard journey of healing and forgiveness could finally begin. "I'm glad to hear that," I said softly, my voice thick with feeling. "Because Emily deserves nothing less than a partner who loves and respects her for who she is, not who he wants her to be. And if you're truly willing to be that partner, then I'm willing to support you in any way I can." David nodded, a small, tentative smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Thank you," he said softly, his voice filled with gratitude. "I know that I don't deserve your forgiveness or your support, but I promise that I'll do everything in my power to earn it." And with those words, I felt a sense of peace and closure that I hadn't experienced in longer than I could remember. Because I knew that no matter what the future held, my daughter would be okay. She had the strength and the courage and the love to face whatever lay ahead, and she had a family that would always be there to support her and guide her along the way. As I rose to leave, I felt a hand on my arm, and turned to see David looking at me with a new sense of respect and understanding. "Thank you," he said again, his voice barely above a whisper, "for everything." I nodded, feeling a lump rise in my throat. "Just take care of her," I said softly, my voice rough with emotion. "That's all I ask." And with that, I stepped out into the cool autumn air, feeling a sense of lightness and freedom that I hadn't experienced in years. Because I knew that after all the pain and struggle and heartache, my family had finally found its way back to each other, back to the love and the strength that had always bound us together. As I walked down the quiet, tree-lined street, I felt a sense of gratitude and wonder at the journey that had brought me to this moment. It hadn't been easy, and there had been times when I had doubted myself and my ability to make a difference. But in the end, I had found the courage to stand up for what I believed in, to fight for the people I loved and the life I knew we all deserved. And as I looked up at the stars twiningly overhead, I felt a sense of peace and contentment that I knew would stay with me for the rest of my days, because I had finally learned the true meaning of love and family, and I knew that nothing could ever take that away from me. with a small, satisfied smile, I climbed into my car and headed off into the night, ready to face whatever the future had in store with an open heart and a willing spirit. Because I knew that no matter what lay ahead, I had everything I needed right there inside me. The strength, the courage, and the love to see it through to the end. In the weeks and months that followed, I watched with pride and amazement as my family began to heal and grow in ways I had never thought possible. Emily and David threw themselves into the hard work of rebuilding their marriage, attending counseling sessions, and learning new ways to communicate and support each other. It wasn't always easy, and there were times when old hurts and resentments threatened to resurface. But through it all, they remained committed to each other and to the love that had brought them together in the first place. As for me, I found myself embracing my new role as the wise and supportive patriarch, offering guidance and encouragement whenever it was needed, but also learning to step back and let my children find their own way. I continued to pursue my own passions and interests, nurturing the friendships and hobbies that had brought me so much joy and fulfillment in the wake of my own personal journey. And as the years passed and my grandchildren grew into bright, capable young adults, I felt a sense of legacy and purpose that I had never known before. I watched them navigate the challenges and triumphs of their own lives with the same strength and resilience that I had always admired in Emily, and I knew that I had played a part in shaping the people they had become. Of course, there were still moments of doubt and uncertainty, times when I worried about the future and all the unknowns that lay ahead. But whenever those fears began to creep in, I would think back to the journey that had brought me to this moment. The pain and the struggle, the love and the trial and humph. And I would feel a sense of peace and acceptance that I knew would carry me through whatever lay ahead. Because in the end, that was what mattered most. Not the destination, but the journey itself. And all the twists and turns and unexpected detours that had shaped us into the people we were meant to be. And as I looked out at the faces of my family gathered around me, I knew that I had everything I needed right there in front of me. The love, the laughter, and the unbreakable bonds that would always hold us together no matter what the future might bring. Years later, as I sat in my favorite armchair watching the sun set over the hills behind my house, I could in my old journal and flipped through the pages that held the story of my life. I read about the young man I had once been, so full of dreams and ambition, and the father I had become, so consumed by the needs and expectations of others that I had almost lost myself along the way. But most of all, I read about the journey of self-discovery and transformation that had brought me to this moment. The pain and the joy, the love and the loss, the trial and humphs that had shaped me into the man I was today. And as I closed the journal and looked out at the colors painting the sky, I felt a sense of gratitude and wonder at the life I had been given. I thought about Emily and David, now happily married for over a decade, and the love and respect that had grown between them in the wake of their early struggles. I thought about my grandchildren, so full of energy and promise, and the legacy of strength and resilience that I knew they would carry with them wherever they went. And I thought about the man I had become, the father, the grandfather, the friend and mentor who had learned to stand up for himself and for the people he loved, no matter what challenges or obstacles lay ahead. It hadn't been an easy road, and there had been times when I had doubted myself and my ability to make a difference. But in the end, I had found the courage to fight for what I believed in, and to build a life that was filled with meaning and purpose and joy. As the last rays of sunlight faded from the sky and the stars began to twinkle overhead, I felt a sense of peace and contentment that I knew would stay with me for the rest of my days, because I had finally learned the true meaning of love and family, and I knew that nothing could ever take that away from me. With a small, satisfied smile, I rose from my chair and headed inside, ready to face whatever the future had in store with an open heart and a willing spirit. Because I knew that no matter what lay ahead, I had everything I needed right there inside me: the strength, the courage, and the love to see it through to the end. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.